I've thought a lot about VHS as a format, and it's sort of interesting in that I get the nostalgia as I was a kid during when you would go to your local video store and rent a movie on the weekends or when you were bored, or most of my summer, knowing me. And I never understood the nostalgia necessarily for it, because although I still have a VCR that's plugged in and ready to go at all times, still to this day, just because sometimes you can't find things on DVD or streaming or whatever, but I never really liked the format. Like, if I could watch a movie I really love, like Star Wars or Jaws or, Speed, or, any of the big movies that I used to watch on VHS a lot, Wayne's World, any of the Mystery Science Theaters, I'd much rather watch it on DVD because of the quality, and it runs better, and I don't have to worry about tracking and all the other various things. As a format, like, it's not like vinyl or 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter or watching a film projected, because the quality just isn't really that great. There's nothing you're really seeing with it. I understand if people feel that that's the way they saw Home Alone and that's the only way they want to watch Home Alone. I sort of get it, but in terms of presentation, you're sort of like, you can watch the movie in much better quality on a different format or the ease of streaming or whichever. I never really got the nostalgia necessarily of the format itself, because there's not much to be nostalgic for other than like, hey, remember when things were like crappier and stuff. I don't think the format itself is what people are nostalgic for. I think it is the physical location. Now, at first you're like, yeah, but Blockbuster sort of sucked. Like, I like going there, I like the thrill of it, but it as a store does sort of suck. And I grew up with a Blockbuster, but it wasn't my main video store. When the Blockbuster I went to through a lot of my childhood closed, I was thinking like it wasn't a big deal. It was sort of like, oh, all right, they moved it to a different location, and which was a little closer, but it just didn't have like the same like, oh, but this one is gone feeling, even though I had seen like some major stuff through there. Both the Blockbusters I went to, there's a lot of Blockbusters back then, kids. There's like a lot of them. I went to like 3 different throughout my childhood, and I don't think I really loved any of them, to be honest. But then there was the video store that I could walk to from my parents' house when I lived there, because I was a kid and stuff, called Video Center. And Video Center was kind of personal to me because it was run by a family whose name I unfortunately don't remember now. A husband and wife, and their kids would sometimes be there to do a shift or something, but it was mainly them. And I remember, they knew me. They knew that I liked older films. They knew that when I was allowed to see R-rated stuff, because they'd write that in their computer. I know Blockbusters would do that, but it felt different when your parents would just literally talk to another parent and tell them, don't let them watch this. And there was a summer where I tried to watch all of the AFI Top 100 that I hadn't seen, and I did most of it that summer. I finished it later on in life. I have seen all the AFI 100. I remember how encouraging they were, and be like, oh, Bridge Over the River Kwai, that movie's so good. And like, I remember when I'd be doing more of the newer things, newer by like the 70s, which isn't that newer, they wouldn't be as into it, but it was like they were so encouraging for me to keep watching older films and different older films, and getting into all sorts of stuff from, I remember they had actually had a VHS copy of Eraserhead. They had sort of a random collection of movies. They had the current hits, they had the new releases, and from, I believe it was Monday to Thursday, but it might have even been Tuesday to Thursday. I think Tuesday to Thursday normally, because of 3-day weekends and whatnot, they had two for $2, or it was like buy one get one, so you could get a new movie. If you got a new movie, you get 2 new movies, but which was $3. If you got an old movie, which was $2, you could get 2, which I did a lot. Most of my summers I would always do that, and I'd watch both, and I loved doing that. And it was a big part of my film education, was just going there and finding what they had. And they had a Monty Python shelf, they had a James Bond shelf, they had shelves for various different genres and titles, and they had different genres like action, sci-fi, family, all sorts of stuff. And it just had this home quality to it. Like, it was like visiting someone's house. I mean, it had this family feel to it, and I remember I wasn't into really, I didn't have a Nintendo, but my friends that did, they had like the few NES games, and even though by the time I was able to walk there with money and get stuff, my friends would get the NES games there, and I don't think they had Super Nintendo, but they had some video games. But it was cool. Like we always like being there and going like, oh, they have this. We should rent this. Finally, we should see this, and they'd be encouraging. Or if I wanted to see something like Mallrats or Evil Dead 2, make sure like the guy was there so I could rent them, and maybe he wouldn't notice that on my account it said I couldn't rent R movies. Going with my mom the day that I was allowed to rent R-rated movies, and I think the first two I rented were like Silence of the Lambs and Trainspotting or something. I went hardcore. I was like, I can rent R-rated. I could see R-rated movies, but only certain ones. But like the day they changed their minds on that, it was like, we're going in. We're doing this. I think I watched People vs. Larry Flint like the next day, and Fargo. I was a cool R-rated kid, I guess, for R-rated movies. But I just loved going to that place, and it closed down because I believe the husband died, even though I knew the wife probably more. She was there more when I was renting movies. And I feel like I would talk to her more about movies and what I liked about how many movies I was getting done on my list and things like that. And it wasn't the only video store I went to. So I went to different ones because they had different options. So I went to Hollywood Video, which had a cult movie section, which I watched all of. It was a small section, but they had some weirder stuff. So I definitely was like, let's exhaust this resource. Then they had Movie Time Video, which was also, or had an amazing selection and had punch cards, and you get free movies sometimes and stuff. And they did have a really great selection. But Video Center it was kind of interesting because it didn't just have the big movies and the things it had to have. It had some weirder stuff, like it had Eraserhead, like I said, like it had weirder cult stuff, like it had Thumb Wars, the Star Wars parody. It had the Bambi. It had like short film collections from when VHS was early on. I think I saw Dark Star there. Like they had stuff where like they had been a video store forever, and it seemed like they would just take anything at a certain point, or seeing all sorts of. I just remember thinking it had an interesting selection. Even when I went to film school, I'd go back and go, oh, I should rent this or I should rent that. And I just really loved that store and that important place it had in my film education, from seeing my first Studio Ghibli films there to seeing most of the classic cinema. I mean, I remember renting Bridge Over the River Kwai. I remember renting Lawrence of Arabia there. I remember seeing Chaplin stuff there. I remember so many big movies that really meant something to me coming from that place. I remember like reserving movies with them, and they called me and go, hey, we have Analyze This. Was it Analyze This or Analyze That? Whatever the first one was. Or Good Will Hunting. I was like, please, when there's a copy back, I really want to see these movies. Could you let me know when they're back? And even though they knew I was going to be back like the next day, they actually called me, which always felt like special. Like I was like, they would like literally call me because they probably knew like I would rent it. I would show up within the half hour and rent it and watch it that night and return it. I loved Video Center. I loved renting stuff from there. I miss it, and I miss the whole thing that I don't think streaming can ever have, which is a mom and pop quality, which is a home quality, the quality like, these are the people I get my movies from, a face, a personality. And I don't think Netflix, there's certain things I understand, like Netflix and streaming has, where like if you're embarrassed about seeing a movie, you have to rent 2 other movies and like hide that you're seeing whatever the embarrassing movie is, or something like that. You don't have to do that with streaming, but at the same time, I don't think streaming will ever have like kind of an interesting curated selection made by people who have maybe just ordered what they could, half like this is what we still have, and whichever. Oh, I remember getting IBC root beers from there and putting them in brown paper bags so people would think I was drinking beer when I was like 14 because I'm so cool. But also like seeing, most of the Connery Bond stuff there, seeing like everything I watched in the 90s was pretty much from there. I saw Run Lola Run there. I remember seeing Ghost World, and like almost like, it was like when you get Ghost World, I think I was the first person to rent Ghost World from there because it was like so hyped to see Ghost World. I didn't get to see it in the theater for whatever reason. I love that I got to experience that, and I'm sad for future generations because I think that was a really great fun thing. You could walk and like talk about them and get excited about, well, what other movies could we get? What do you think of this movie? What do you think of that? Like the discussion that I guess now is on Twitter or what have you could be done on the way there, but in an era that you could have that kind of homey feel, that you're in someone's home, almost that you're in someone's store, that this is a store that they own independently, and there was a certain level of respect. Whereas Blockbuster, you knew they could just like order a new copy of whatever movie you might have rented if you didn't bring it back. I never did that, but I'm just saying, like, there's sort of more of a like cold corporation company feel, and Video Center never had that. And I miss it, and I wish I could walk in there and just rent a movie, and seeing it when I went back and seeing how it is just sort of there. I don't know if anything has happened to it since, but it's sad that it kind of just went away when the husband died, and it didn't really become anything after that. And I wish it had, I don't know, continued, but I guess you can't, because you can't really rent DVDs out as much for the home mom and pop places. So many of them closed when DVD happened because you couldn't really rent those as well, and they get scratched and you have to replace them a lot. So it's almost like the corporate Blockbuster, Hollywood Video type places sort of won out in that end. I don't know Hollywood Video's history, so it might have failed at that point, but it was just harder to replace those, and it wasn't as easy as like buying a VHS 10 12 years before and just like having it forever. But I would recommend it to people at the time. Even I'd say, hey, they have Eraserhead, they have some cool cult stuff. It was mainly like they had Eraserhead, which was super rare then, so people would go, oh shit, I'm gonna go to the Eraserhead place. But I love Video Center. I miss it. I miss mom and pop video places, even if it was at the kind of convenience store near your home that just happened to have them. It felt more personal. It felt more homey. It felt more part of your community. It didn't feel like a company you're going to, a corporation you're going to, who made these huge streaming deals. None of that really seemed to feel. It felt more kind of a little more close to home and homey, and that's what I think I'm nostalgic for when I think of VHS and the video era. Is I'm nostalgic for the idea that there would be tons of these different stores, and they could be anywhere. They wouldn't just have to be Blockbusters, and they could be run by a couple who has a family who just likes being the neighborhood video store, and you like going in there and trying to see as many movies as you can. And that just felt sort of folksy, sort of Norman Rockwell-y, I guess, but it just felt really fun and good, and it gave you sort of a home and a heart and a mind to follow with your journey of movies. And I don't know if Netflix does that, and I guess I'm not saying it was better, but I'm saying I think I understand why there's a nostalgia for that, because it's one thing to be nostalgic for a time and say things were better, but it's another thing to be nostalgic for a place and a person who made an impact on your life and will definitely be an important piece in what made you who you are. And that's something I think we can all understand why you'd be nostalgic for. So if you have anything to say about VHS nostalgia, or your favorite video store that you used to go to, or if you actually went to Video Center, I'd love to hear that also. It was on York Road, close to Towson, Maryland. Then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. All right. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.